and welcome to What's Possible When We're Managing Change. My name is Eileen Schaefer, and I'm the CEO of Silicon Valley Change Executive Coaching. We decided to do a little bit of a unique webinar today. I have been hearing nonstop from our HR partners just about how tough it is right now, managing through change, everything from anticipating a recession to significant layoffs at major organizations at this point. Still people who are leaving their jobs. We're in constant flux and it's hard to get our footing at this point. So with that in mind, I thought, we have a few experts on our team. I think I'm going to give them a call and see if we can put our heads together and just share some of our thoughts, maybe some tools and things that might help you as a leader or as an organization navigate these unique waters. So my background, I'll start with mine for a moment, kind of how I get connected into change. And then I'm going to let each of our coaches, and we also have the founder of Silicon Valley Change here as well today. I'm going to let them introduce themselves. So my background started way back when I began my career with a master's in counseling psychology, and the specific focus is managing life transitions. So we are clearly navigating nonstop life transitions. And so that's where I began my career and then have been working as an executive coach ever since, helping individuals as they navigate change. So that would be me. Senya, I'm going to drop down to you. Senya is the founder of Silicon Valley Change Executive Coaching and owner. She also, I just want to show her book, Profit from the Positive. I always love to show this. It is one of my most favorite books, not because Senya is on the show with me today. It is just a powerful leadership book with tons and tons of tools. So if you do not already have it, you might want to consider getting your copy. And Senya, now you get to do your own introduction.
I feel like I should add a small little anecdote since you showed the book. One day, Lisa was visiting me at my home, and I was so glad. And she came about a half hour before I did. So I told her where the key was. She walks in, she's like, Senya has all these green Profit from the Positive books here in her office. Why? And then she's like, oh yeah, Senya's the author of that book.
I love it.
She's hoarding these. What's going on?
And it is such a great book. I could understand why you would have boxes and boxes of them, really.
I got it. I've just always been interested in change. My PhD at Stanford in organizational behavior was about change and how you can make change in situations in which you're stuck. And just like so a lot of leaders aren't stuck and they're really great on, let's say, 5 out of 6 domains in their life, but they might be stuck on the 6th. What do you do in those cases? And just like you said, Eileen, even in Profit from the Positive, Margaret Greenberg, my co-author, and I, we write at least 3 different tools specific to change. So I'm sure we'll get into those. So my background in change is just that I think it's critical for everything. And I will just end with the obvious statement that the company that we are all a part of is called Silicon Valley Change. And that is for the behavior change that it's just critical for us each of us to start to make that behavior change to lead to company change, world change, and so on. Thanks, Eileen.
Thank you. I'm so happy that you're with us. And why don't we bump over to Lisa Sansom, and she's coming in from Canada. Lisa.
I am, and we just had so much snow here. I'm wishing I was in California. So my background is my first career is I was a high school teacher, and then I went and got my MBA. And my first job after getting my MBA was in this new to me field of organizational development. And my leader at the time, who was a fantastic manager, said, Lisa, we want you to become our change management expert, and sent me off to training. And that was my first exposure to change management. And that was 23 years ago. And what I remember vividly is that as a young woman, I was going off on a maternity leave, which here in Canada is 1 year. And so I left the workplace for 1 year. And when I came back, there was this major change that was supposed to have been implemented during the time that I was gone. And literally the same posters were in the kitchen, and someone had gone around with a Sharpie and changed the launch date on them. And on my first day back, my manager brings me in. She's like, Lisa, you're going to work on that project and you're going to help them get this back on track. And I was like, okay. And it was a fabulous way to learn about change management. And so in the 20 or so years since then, I've been involved in a lot of changes, leading them myself, consulting to change leaders, running change teams on the organizational side, and training a lot of managers on what does it mean when somebody is going through a change at work, and how do we deal with this in the ever accelerating pace of change? So I'm thrilled to be here and have this conversation with all of you about that as well.
Thank you so much, Lisa. And for those who are watching, we are having an upcoming session that's dedicated to change for our HR partners. So if you are an HR partner and would like to join us, please do reach out. We would love to have you join the conversation with a dedicated talk with Lisa on this same topic. All right, now our furthest reaching person on our team is Lola. Lola is calling in from Israel. So I am so happy you're here late at night for you. Thank you. Please introduce yourself.
Happy to be here. Thank you very much. So I'm Lola Rockney. And I'm an organizational consultant. And I started my career as a software engineer. And as a software engineer, I had to create a change in my company when I worked in a high-tech company. I had to create a change that involved all the people in the company. And then I realized how difficult it is to make a change, because I created a solution. And like many managers, in the beginning, I thought that when you say the good solution you have, everybody will join in and work that. And it's so easy. And then I realized lots of things, that when there's no communication and you have to deal with politics and all sorts of things other than the actual change, that's when change started to be more interesting for me. And then I did a career change, and I went into organizational consulting and positive psychology. And since then, that's my passion, and helping managers and organizations steer through change.
Thank you, Lola, for sharing. And I want to highlight one thing that Lola just mentioned. She went to the Master's in Applied Positive Psychology program at the University of Pennsylvania, which all three of our guests are graduates of that program. So we do at Silicon Valley Change, we look through a lens of positive psychology, the science of well-being, which is so essential as people are navigating change. We often forget what's happening to that individual. How are they holding up? And it can really rock the core. And so having that ability to keep your eye on well-being, burnout signs, what's going on for the person who is trying to do this heavy lift in an organization, or just teetering, not knowing where we're going. We have a lot of organizations in the middle of acquisition, but it's been that way for quite some time. So they don't know, is it going to go through? Is it not going to go through? So teetering in that space can really be hard on the well-being of an individual. And that's where we bring in our positive psychology to also make sure that we have a keen eye watching the individual and making sure that they have the tools to still, I'm going to say flourish, but at least survive during these times. So with that in mind, I'm going to just jump in. What are you all seeing in the trenches? What are you seeing your clients go through right now? So let's launch there and then see where that takes us.
I will talk about my clients, is that change is ever present. And being a leader or a manager is synonymous with change management. There's just no pulling these apart. And change is ongoing. I mean, it used to be, and I might be talking about, the 60s or the 70s, that change was a project. And you kind of had a beginning, a middle, and an end, and then things would stabilize. And you had a new project and a beginning and a middle and an end. And now it's just not feasible. There's a lot of change going on in the external world. There's a lot going on in the organizational world, and there's a lot going on at the team unit. And then you've got people's lives where things are constantly changing. And there's multiple layers and there's multiple projects. But then there's also like Zoom just changed. And now what does that mean for how we coordinate? And it feels like people's change capacities are getting really, really full. And it's kind of like a sponge, like you can pour water into it, but at some point it starts leaking. And that's hitting a lot of our clients because their change capacities are getting tapped up. And so are the change capacities of their teams and the employees that they care really deeply about. And so there's a lot of questions about how do I do this when everybody is so tapped out and there's more changes coming down. So it is ever present for my clients.
Yeah. I think one thing also, Lisa, as you say that, and that's what I'm finding through our HR partners who we're who I'm talking to, forward facing, as well as my individual clients who I'm coaching. It is that nonstop, we haven't been able to catch our breath. And I was talking to an HR partner actually yesterday, and he said, it's interesting because as we have newer generations coming up, they haven't been through where we've seen huge layoffs in the thousands way back when all of us were still coaching in this space. So we have gone through that. One thing, though, that's significantly different is we never caught our breath after COVID. And COVID is something the pandemic, none of us have ever experienced a pandemic before. So you already put that out there where we're trying to catch our breath and get stable again. And then you have all of this. And even if you've experienced layoffs in the tens of thousands or whatever, you've gone through similar kind of things, we're still on the heels of something we've never experienced. So that's something else I'm noticing.
I totally agree with Lisa. There's lots of change all the time. Different markets go through different frequency of change. Some markets go a little bit through change or less frequent changes, and in high-tech companies, like we see, the change is all the time happening. I come today, I know what I do tomorrow, everything can change. But on all markets, the change frequency is getting higher and higher.
Yeah.
That's what I see. And I see also there are two different kinds of changes or different kinds of changes that we as coaches treat a little bit differently. One kind of change is the changes that come upon us. I'm the subject of the change. There's a change in the company and I have to adjust to it. Mm-hmm. Another kind of change is that the manager says, I want to change something. My team doesn't work as well as I think it should. I want to change things inside. I want people to do different things or do things differently. And that's a change that I actively create, and I have to manage it. I have to recruit the people to work with me, and that's a totally different mindset of dealing with change. So I see these two come in different situations.
Yeah, the different perspectives and lenses. Yeah, absolutely.
I think I would piggyback exactly on Lola's with different perspectives and just what lens do you want to see change through. So I'll do this through an example. I'm a chief people officer to high growth technology companies. And the most recent company that I was with, we grew from 150 to 650 employees. And in that time, I saw change at a mega level, at a company level, and at an individual level. So at a mega level, you're all familiar with, I'm sure all of the people listening are familiar with VUCA, this environment of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And then I was recently just talking about change to a group of leaders, and they said, hey, Senya, VUCA is almost passé. You should be talking about polycrisis, the whole idea that there's a war, and all of you are nodding, but it might be a new word to some of the people watching, there's a war, there's the continued effect of COVID, there's the recession. So all of the more than one thing happening at once. That's the polycrisis. So that's kind of at this mega level. And then at the company level, there's so many things, just like Lola mentioned, and Eileen, you mentioned also acquisitions, and some of our clients at Silicon Valley Change, even the anticipation of an acquisition or a core team that knows about an acquisition but can't say anything because it's so secretive, but it's a big core team. So we this is very public about the company that I was with. We acquired 3 companies, and integrating them in that company level thing. Like Lisa was saying, you might think you could just set the integration and go, but it's revisiting that again and again and again. And it's all of us. I forget it. The managers forget it. The leaders forget it, just how iterative it needs to be. So I'm seeing that at the company level. And then at the individual level, like you all have mentioned, it's so much change. So we've got mega, we've got at the company level, and then at the individual level, so much change. And what am I responsible for? What do I need to do? As a side part of that story where I was working with this company, we did a large technology change. We changed the HR information system for the company. And a week after we changed it, a manager had a confidential conversation with me and said, Senya, 5 of my 10 direct reports did not know they're supposed to make this change. He said, really? So we've literally sent out 40 pieces of communication talking about it at an all team, emails, individual emails. And they came to him the day after the change. Hey, what happened with 40? I mean, literally 40. So it's not a knock actually on those people. It's just, there's so much.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's information overwhelm at this point. It's change overwhelm at this point. It's interesting you say that, Senya. I remember you and I talked about that. We had a conversation quite a while ago about change. And one of the things that you see across the board that they say to be effective in change for, and to Lola's point, being as you communicate out to the people who are on the recipient side, is communicate, over communicate, communicate again. Communicate what you just communicated. And I remember you and I talking about that, Senya. So it's funny to say, even when we've done that 40 times, but it is, I think our brains can only handle so much. And so many of us are just trying to stay afloat at this point. And then you miss things that come through.
If I might add to that, communicate in new and unusual and creative ways as well. That people don't expect, because sometimes, and not saying this was your situation, Senya, but sometimes people say, but we let everybody know and we over communicated, but they only did it by email. And they only used one channel, and it was all push communications. And I worked in a hospital for a while, and we had a big change coming, and it really impacted the nurses. And what we did is at shift change at 7 a.m. and at 7 p.m., we were standing at the entrances and exits of the hospital, literally handing people postcards that explained the change as they were coming and going. And we did that as a couple of shift changes. And putting something in people's hands and being there physically is not something that all organizations can do. And I understand that, but it caught the attention of those nurses so that we had a much better uptake on the change. And it required more effort, but it was certainly worth it, so that we weren't getting half of the nurses saying, we didn't know this was coming on, because it was they were critical stakeholders in the change. So figure out where people are getting their information and make sure that you're leveraging all the possible channels that you can.
What a great
channel that you said that I really, really like, Lisa, is push. We think push, whatever it is, whether we say it in an all team or we send it by email, or we send it by individual email. But there's something about two-way communication. So this, like a manager saying, this change is about to happen. What are you going to do? Okay, check. I work with Joe. Joe told me he's going to do these things, but that two-way just doesn't happen. And the corporation that's got a lot of things often doesn't happen, not by any fault, but just, push is a big emphasis, I think.
I'd like to add to that. I think the most important thing, and whenever I go into companies and work about incorporating change, I use Isaac Adidjas' phrase. Adidjas is a very known organizational consultant all over the world. He consulted to countries and to big companies, international companies. And what he used to say, and he says, is whoever rocks the boat rows the boat. And that means that whoever is able to rock the change, whoever is able to stop the change, you have to incorporate them into building the change itself.
Yeah.
And it's the part of building the change, of planning the change, that has to incorporate as many people as possible, as many stakeholders as possible. And Adi just gives an example. The part that you go to hotels and you have to throw the towel on the floor so they clean it. It wasn't like that like 20 years ago. It started a few years ago. And what he says is that this was an idea, and the purpose of that is to is sustainability and to reduce use of water and he says that this idea was an idea of a cleaner in a hotel. They did a very big, they wanted to save money. So the hotel made a big conference and they wanted to get ideas from everybody. And they invited all the people. He says he doesn't remember. He thinks that this cleaner didn't have a legal right to work there even. But they invited everybody that was in the process. And that idea came up and they used it. And now it's all over the world. So whoever rocks the boat, rows the boat, I think that's, if I have one thing to tell somebody that creates a change, is this thing.
So I have go ahead, Lisa.
Well, I was just going to say, it is so important to get involvement and inclusion in the creation of change. Not only do you hear better ideas, like Lola just indicated, but once the direction has been set, you still need people involved in the how are we going to do this and how do we communicate and who gets involved and what's the pace of this and what does this look like. It's absolutely essential to take that systemic inclusive approach.
So that's a perfect launch. I have a question for all three of you, but based on this, I was meeting with a client, a HR partner client, and he said, what are some ideas for how, once that direction has been set, and now you're a leader charged to carry it out or be one of the people to help to implement, and you don't agree with it? What are some, bless you, Senya, what are some options for that leader? How do you, as the leader, take something that you're not necessarily aligned with, but you're now in the role of needing to communicate it outward? What are some thoughts that you all have for how to manage that?
Yeah, and let's recognize that's real. That absolutely does happen. And there are all sorts of reasons why changes are going to happen outside an organization. Like they might be legislative changes, for example, and you have to make changes that you don't particularly like, don't have the time for, don't see the point in, but you absolutely have to make these changes. And so a couple of the things that I have shared with leaders in that point is, number one, like, is there any good that's coming out of this? Like, is there a possibility that we can reframe how you see that? Because you have to do it anyway. So where are the kind of energy motivator pieces? And another is, let's work on that messaging that you're going to share to your team, because it's probably your team that needs to operationalize this in some way. How can you still present this honestly? Mm-hmm. And it's okay in some, again, situations and some changes to be able to say to a team, I know this is hard, and a lot of us might not like this or agree with it. and we're still going to do a good job. Because let's recognize we're all professionals and we're all in this together. And we hired you because you are good, smart, capable people. And there's parts of everybody's life, it's kind of part of adulting that there are things we have to do every day that we don't like, maybe don't agree with, and we do them anyways because there is a bigger benefit. So how do we get together, again, that inclusive piece, how do we get together and do the best job that we absolutely can with this thing, even though it is annoying, frustrating, distasteful, whatever it is, and create that safe space for people to talk about it and share their frustrations, even while they're doing a good job on executing it.
Great. I like what you said, Lisa. I think this conversation of bringing everybody, again, I'm back to whoever rocks the boat, rows the boat, connecting it to what you say, bringing everybody together and sharing the best ways they see that the change can be implemented for them. And then creating also, not just giving the message out, but also creating that shared space, you said, to highlight concerns and stuff like that, but also to create a shared knowledge of how do we do it together in these in this situation, in these limitations.
Yeah, my comment would tie Lola and Lisa's comments together. As a chief people officer and thinking what decisions need to be made and are they made the right way, I would start with what Lola's saying, which is why wasn't that manager part of the process? And sure, you can't go back, but can you make managers like this part of future processes? So at a company level, how can you set decision making and decision flow steps in the right way? So that's precursor. And then once it's made, Lisa, I agree with you, and I also disagree with the idea that you could say sometimes to a team, "Hey, I agree that you could say, hey, it's hard." I'm a little torn about the situation that you can say, I mean, as a manager of you all, let's say you're a team of 10, I don't necessarily agree with this decision. I feel like it's almost often, not always, everything can differ. It's almost your role to support the decision that, let's say, the CEO has made. So let me give a little more detail. There's certainly Jeff Bezos's, somebody decides, but then commits. Like, you can disagree, but still commit. And you may need to do that as a manager. The other angle is, I feel that gossip is so easy and like venting is so easy. And people should do that. Like Eileen keeps mentioning our HR business partners that we work with at Silicon Valley Change. People at all companies should go to their HR business partners and vent. That is okay. You can do that. That's not to your manager. That's not creating a conflict with your manager. So the part that, Lisa, I'm a little just thinking about is, I almost feel like the manager should get on that boat, to use Lola's analogy. I'm sort of thinking it through as I'm speaking with you all, because if the manager expresses so much dislike of the decision, the team may do it just somewhat grudgingly. And I think this is a really big problem for managers. I've seen it ever since I started coaching with Silicon Valley Change. You are in such a tricky situation. People above you know more. People below you, people who report to you, they can't know what, let's say, the CEO knows. They can't. It's not possible. So maybe a way, Lisa, for me, and I'm thinking through this, to get exactly on board with what you're saying, is to say, hey, this decision was a surprise for me also, or it wasn't what I expected. There are things that the person who made the decision, let's say the VP of engineering or the CEO, there are things that person knows that aren't part of the kind of the landscape that we can see. And so there are things that I don't even know parts of why this decision was made.
Yeah. So I'm putting a lot of wiggle room around that. And I would never want to put a leader into a place of dishonesty where they feel that they have to lie to their team to get them on board, because that's also going to leak and that's also going to come back and bite you. So I agree with you. I think it's entirely possible for a leader to say, this is hard. For a leader to say, this decision came above and we don't have all the information, but we know here's what we need to do. And to include everybody in the conversation about how do we do this the best that we can anyways. And also to be able to hold the space for people to express, I don't like this. I don't agree with this. And and sometimes those are, like you said, they're internal decisions. Some VP somewhere made this decision. And yes, we would have wanted that manager to have a voice into that. But sometimes these decisions are made from places that we absolutely cannot control. Like the European Union all of a sudden decided that there needed to be different privacy protocols. And you've got Google jumping through hoops to say, okay, how do we implement this? They don't like it. It's getting in the way of their operating model and their business model, and they darn well have to do it anyways, or else they will cease to exist. And I think it's okay for there to be space to talk about, we don't like it. Let's just clear that. And then, because we're good, competent professionals, we put our heads down and say, how do we make this happen the best that we can anyway? So I agree with you. If a manager is saying, I don't like this, and that's turning into resistance and that's leaking into the team, now that's problematic as well. But I think somewhere in there is this kind of happy medium to hold the space. And maybe the manager does kind of complain up and protects down. And maybe there is some way of managing that. And yes, go and vent to your HR business partner. But I also wouldn't want a manager to lie if somebody looks them in the eyes and says, but surely you can't be 100% on board with this. And the manager is like feeling torn apart because they're not 100% on board with it. And they don't want to lie, but they don't want to spread anything that is toxic. And, being able to admit to that struggle openly and honestly and vulnerably.
I think also we're in... Yeah, I agree, Shania. Thumbs up. And just listen to our dialogue here. It's hard. This is hard. Even coaches are trying to figure out what is the best path forward. And I think we're in a really unique time yet again, generationally. We all three grew up more when oftentimes things weren't debatable, period. This is the message, and you carry it forward. There were many times I started my career at UC Berkeley, and there were many things that came down that I'm like, what? And you just do it. This is the policy, and we're not going to debate it. And I think we're in a different time now where things seem to be more debatable, even if they're not debatable. We want to believe that we can debate it and possibly change the course when, in fact, every now and then, many times, this is going to be what we're going to move forward on. And so what I love, though, Lisa, is, and Senya, I know you agree, is having that space to vent, though. That doesn't mean you need to agree. It doesn't mean you need to like it. It's okay to say, do you know what this does to my workload now? And now I need to call this customer or do whatever it looks like. And that feels weird, to have that space. One thing I want to go back to, Lisa, and this is so positive psychology of you, but I love, and this is what we do with our clients, is there any good in this? Mm-hmm. What piece is good? And how can we latch on to that and figure out, okay, can we see this from different angles and possibly even have a mind reframe? And that doesn't mean convincing ourselves that something that's horrible is good. You're just looking for what's right about this, or what might be a teeny tiny piece that can help you sleep better at night.
And if that teeny tiny piece is, it means our company can stay in business.
Correct.
Go for that.
Correct. I have a job tomorrow. That's a good thing. So, as we round out the time, what would you each say is maybe one thing that a leader can do to set them up for success in our current waters?
I have a feeling like Lola wanted to say something before we got into that. So I just wanted to see if Lola had any pieces of wisdom to share before we move on, or maybe it was something on that question.
Yeah, I wanted to add to Eileen, but...
please do. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you, Lisa. I think there are two more things that what you said is very important, to look at what what's working there? What's the motivation to create the change? There are two more things that I can say in order to add the motivation for change. One thing is if the manager creates a clear vision of where are we going, not just you have to change this and change that. What will I get out of it? What's the case for change? What's the rationale here? And giving it, and where are we going? So that's one thing. Another thing is, there's Mintzberg, who was another management expert. He says people are not afraid of change, they're afraid of loss. So in every change, look for the things that people are losing or are afraid of losing and address these. For example, if I even tell people, press this button instead of this button, and that's the change I want, the first thing that comes to their mind is, maybe if I press this button, they won't need me again. I'm doing something else. Maybe I'm going to be fired at some point. And if it might not even be as clear to them, or as they're not aware of it exactly, that's what they think, but they will resist the change. So I think looking for what are people losing there and addressing it is part of giving them the ability to create that change. So I added two things to what you said, Eileen.
Thank you. I love how you added that, because it does, then it triggers the fear brain. And then we get into an emotional space, and because we're just thinking of loss. So thank you. That's so important. All right, then I will ask, I'm going to have two more questions. This time flew by. I think we'll definitely need a part two. So what do you think leaders can do to set themselves up for the best success during uncertain times?
I think for me, the one thing that comes up over and over and over again is, as much as possible, build in time. I like to remind leaders that people are not machines. And, you can change a machine pretty easily. You take out one part and you put in another part, and the machine works better, faster, more accurately, whatever it is. And people don't do that. We change at the speed of nature. And as much as possible, push for that time, advocate for that time, to allow people the time to adapt and grow and get on board and be a part of the solution in the way that you want them to be.
I love that.
I think another thing is to remember that what helps you change is different from what helps others change. And be more open to different ways of helping people. Ask people what would help you. Listen to them, and give them what for each one. Give what fits them.
That's such good stuff. Senya.
Mine's related to Lola and kind of a takeoff on it. The Gallup strength of individualization. I think my video is funny, so I'm kind of in the past tense of everything I'm saying. The Gallup strength of individualization is about that your direct team, and okay, this works for this person or that works for that person. I realize my video is not synced with what I'm saying. And related to that individual, about answering those questions, like letting people vent. as the leader and as the manager, you should be able to ask those questions that you have, that you think your team is going to have, because it's the worst feeling to get into a meeting and not have an answer to something. And if you've asked, so if you're curious about something, well, if we're doing this, how are we going to handle this part? Or how are we going to ask again and again, so you have that information for your team. It's okay for you to do a lot of the asking.
And I will round it out with self-care. Make sure that you are taking care of yourself in this process. When we are just trying to float, and I do all these water analogies. I've got the water behind me, but I am in San Diego, so I'm constantly seeing surfers or people at the ocean. And so when you are treading water, our instinct is to just keep treading. If you can get out of the water onto the sand for a little bit, and whether it's take a walk, make sure you're eating healthy, take a half an hour for self-care is essential. Your brain will operate better. You'll be more productive. You'll be able to think out of the box. But what happens when we are so overloaded, that's the first thing to go. And it's the first thing that needs to stay. So I'm going to throw in the self-care piece. Final thoughts, everybody. What is one takeaway that you hope our listeners will take away?
I think change is possible. You can do this. It might be messy. It might feel messy, but absolutely, you can do this.
I'm going to do one that bounces off of what Lola said about losing. William Bridges is a granddaddy of transitions. He has the model for what transitions looks like. There's many models, but one of the original models. And we always think transitions and change start with beginnings. They start with endings. So there's an ending to what was. You enter then the neutral spot. That neutral zone, we want to get out of so badly. And it is one of the most important places to exhale, think about where we've been, what do we want to take forward with us, and where do we want to be going that's new? And then you get to your beginning. So my guess is if you are in the midst of crazy transition, you might be in that neutral spot that feels like you're just on a freeway in neutral, which is so frustrating. Trust the process, and your beginning will happen soon enough.
That was so well said. I don't have anything to add.
Yeah, I agree.
Boom. Thank you all for joining us. It's been a pleasure. My guess is we will do a part 2. Please, if you're watching this on LinkedIn, put in the comments questions you have, and we'll join back up and we'll answer some of your questions. Thank you, Senya, Lisa, and Lola. Always a pleasure.
Thank you
very much. It was a pleasure.